Have you ever heard the expression, clear is kind, unclear is unkind? That simple yet transformative concept is something that Brené Brown talks about extensively in her book, Dare to Lead. Talking about someone behind their back through, for example, a private chat during a Zoom meeting is unkind. Failing to give a coworker clear expectations because it's too hard, but still holding them accountable for not meeting your expectations is unkind. Sugarcoating feedback to an employee in an effort to make them feel better, which is more often about you avoiding an uncomfortable conversation, is unkind. I'm sure many of you have experienced a work environment where these types of unkind actions take place and know that it leads to all sorts of dysfunction. According to Brené Brown's research, it can lead to a lack of engagement and trust. It can result in an increase in problematic, toxic behavior, such as the pervasive back channel, also known as the meeting after the meeting. And it can lead to decreased performance due to a lack of clarity and shared purpose. If those types of outcomes are ones that you are striving to avoid and embrace more of a clear and is kind approach, you've come to the right place. Hello and welcome to PowerSpeaking Live. I'm Carrie Beckstrom, the host of this monthly series and the CEO of PowerSpeaking Incorporated. Today, in an effort to lead with our best selves and help others to do the same, we're going to be discussing all sorts of strategies for getting really good at giving and receiving feedback and leaning into, rather than avoiding, what are sometimes uncomfortable yet immensely important conversations. And joining us today are two expert panelists. I know, based on our conversation before this event officially started, are very eager to dive into this very important topic. First up, we have Kay Malcolm. Kay has a rich blend of technical chops and infectious charisma. I first met Kay last year at a Women in Tech conference in Texas, where she was the leading keynote speaker. And I was in awe of the way in which Kay commanded the stage and won over her audience in a matter of seconds. Kay applies her technical expertise with one of our client organizations, Oracle, as Vice President of Database Product Management. Kay also has a passion for helping the underserved thrive in corporate. And this passion has resulted in an extensive following in social media as a workplace bestie, where she provides all sorts of tips on how to thrive in the workplace. And I strongly recommend, if you're not already following Kay on Instagram or a equivalent platform, I recommend following her, and we included the link in chat just now. Also joining us is Matt Holcomb. Matt has extensive experience in HR, business development, change leadership, and so much more, working both within organizations such as Best Buy and United Health Group, as well as externally in a consulting capacity. Matt's experience expands HR and talent strategy, leading all HR functions, driving people and talent initiatives, plus building and leading cross functional teams and consulting practices. And all of those things, of course, involve the ability to very thoughtfully and skillfully provide and receive feedback. As with Kay, I have firsthand experience in Matt's capabilities. Over 10 years ago, Matt, I can't believe it's been that long, when Matt was a principal associate at Burson and Associates, Matt helped my team and I lead a very transformational initiative, which was designed to elevate L&D's impact on the business. And Matt, I don't know if I've ever told you this, so I think now with our audience present is a perfect time. To this day, I still carry some sage advice you provided me over 10 years ago. So, as they say, feedback given appropriately is truly a gift. Thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
All right, let's get into it. And I encourage our audience to make this as beneficial for you as possible. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in chat. Also, if you have your own feedback that you'd like to share, we'd love to hear from you. So, Kay, let's kick off with you. In your experience, what does good feedback look like? And how do you know when it's working?
Okay. Um, so in my experience, and I am not, I'm gonna start off by saying Matt is the expert. I am an expert as a result of my failures in giving good feedback, and so you guys are gonna learn from me. So what have I learned? I think there are three things that are really critical for good feedback. It needs to be specific, it needs to be actionable, and then it needs to be balanced. Um, Carrie, I loved what you said about good feedback is kind. Not giving the feedback or not delivering the feedback in a way that the receiver can receive it, it's not kind. And so, specific, actionable balance really it focuses on a clear behavior or an outcome. So, not the person. And one of the things group that we learned is that all three of us are parents of boys. So there's been, I've been able to take sort of my learnings as a parent and apply them to the workplace. So instead of focusing on the behavior or, oh, this is what you did that was bad, and saying, you're not doing well in meetings. That's not great. It's better to say something like, I noticed in yesterday's meeting that your points, they felt rushed. So maybe if you slow down, it might help to make them more impactful. Then good feedback, it always kind of gives a clear path forward. So if you're not pointing out what's wrong, you're sort of creating a safe space and offering ways to improve. You're helping them with prioritization. And then that whole balanced piece. Being able to say, okay, um, let's talk about this difficult feedback. I always like to kind of make it a sandwich and end the conversation with something that they're doing very well.
Excellent, excellent. And, by talking about it being specific and providing very concrete examples is what we mean by being clear. And that is kind because it's coming from a place of help, a desire to help the person get better versus breaking them down.
Mhm.
Uh, Matt, what advice or what have you learned over time as it relates to preparing for especially difficult conversations? Do you have any frameworks that you follow, mental checklists? What advice can you give in that regard?
Yeah, I would say three things that come to mind. And one thing I just want to piggyback off of what Kay said is feedback is something that, if to whatever degree I'm sharing today, I stumbled upon this, both in my personal and my professional life. So feedback to me is something that interwoves the professional and the personal dimensions. And I was really, really bad at it for the longest time. And I would even say today, I'm still everything that I do with respect to feedback, especially that the art or the practice of asking for feedback, giving and receiving feedback, is a work in progress itself. So with that, I would say three things. One is just from a human perspective is imagine yourself being on the receiving end of whatever feedback you want to give. Like just bring a little bit of empathy to what that content will be. Um, and I think second is I try to think about the person, the performance, and the system. And what I mean by that is feedback needs to be distinct from the person. And for me, like personally growing up, I always associated negative feedback as bracing for bad news and internalizing it somehow about me as a person. And that's not the case. Really, really effective feedback is about the performance that we're seeing or not seeing, and how do we make adjustments to that while supporting the person as we're giving that feedback. And then I think the third part is just trying to be mindful of the systems in which we all work. There are structures, there are decision making, there are processes, there are tools, all of which help or hinder individual performance. And so I try to emphasize when with whether it's my kids or team members that yes, here are the things about your own individual performance that we need to address, whether it's positive or corrective. And here are the things that are helping, that I think are helping and hindering, and ask the questions to help them reflect upon their own performance and um, commit to a better way forward together.
Matt, I feel you saying that you, as an HR expert, stumbled upon feedback and don't do it well. I feel better about myself today. Thank you for saying
Yeah, yeah, totally. The reality is humans are messy.
that. Yeah.
Interactions are messy. Uh, and
Our
that's why we often
conversations are
avoid
hard.
conversations are hard. That's why there's then, this over tendency to do it in a not in a synchronous way, but an asynchronous way through Slack, through text, through email,
Right.
right?
Avoid the pain, right?
Avoid the pain and you're in complete control. You can carefully craft your message without having to be prepared on the spot to respond. But we know, especially when it comes to giving nuanced feedback, that you have to take that bold step and actually have that live conversation and know that it might not go perfectly and be prepared to adjust. And Matt, I really like that you talked about it in terms of those three elements: the person, the performance, and the systems. And that does align with the example you gave, Kay. It's not helpful to say you didn't do well in that meeting. That's really focusing on the person
Mhm.
as opposed to giving the very specific example. I noticed that when you were providing the feedback, it was very rushed. That's more focused on the performance, the behavior. Matt, can you talk a little bit more about systems? Are you saying that you also make a point of exploring with the individual as it relates to how we can help them improve their performance, looking at the systems that may be hindering or systems that potentially could help them improve their performance?
Yeah, yeah. So I as I listened to Kay, I was in awe at the natural way that she seems to approach this by way of introducing a tool that that anyone can find. I was first exposed to it through some leadership training that I went through about a dozen years ago, and it's called SBT. So situation behavior. I'm sorry, SBI, situation behavior impact. And to Kay's point about being specific and measurable, the SBI tool is in a situation. This conversation, for example, can be we can look at the transcript, we can listen to the audio. And in this, in this type of situation, there's performance that takes place. And when we're with team members, more appropriately, there's feedback that we may want to give, and that performance may be fantastic. And I fully encourage giving specific and measurable feedback about positive performance, but we tend to disproportionately give the positive and not attend to what needs to be improved. But in that type of situation, you can point to things that were said, observed, written in an email, and there's those behaviors are what we see or hear and observe. And those behaviors have impact that either help or don't help the performance. It might be morale on the other team members. It might be interactions that led to a customer situation that didn't go as well as we wanted, or aspirations that they're doing of their own role or career development that isn't meeting the expectations that were set out or agreed upon. And that tool, SBI, is something that I think came from the Center for Creative Leadership. So it's a fantastic, simple, straightforward, pragmatic tool that anyone can adopt. And when you have that conversation with, literally takes place of, in this situation, here's what I saw or observed, this is the impact that I have on the team. And then you flip to asking questions. Does this resonate? Can you see yourself in this? And then help me understand what may have been taking place. And then let the person talk, not to put them on the spotlight, but to give them a chance to share, which I think takes, for us that aren't naturally super comfortable and confident with giving feedback, stops us from having those assumptions or what we are thinking is wrong or needs to be improved, and gives the person a chance to see themselves in it, and avails both the person getting the feedback and the person whose performance is being discussed a chance to see what factors may be at play that we may not be aware of. May have had a bad day, something is going on at home, technology didn't work. So when I talk about systems, Carrie, I'm talking about there's the organizations in which we work have set up things so that we are successful. Sometimes they are really, really successful and efficient and effective, and sometimes they're not. And that might be decision making. In a team meeting, we may have evolved the team structure or expanded the team. I'm working with a startup that has gone from 20 people to 40 people. The informal ways of working before are now a titch more formal than they used to be. So how people show up and who is making a decision about how to go forward in a business development process is different than it was 3 to 6 months ago. Well, that can unintentionally set people up for success or not. So it might be in that type of situation, the system in which they're working, the process and the decisions wasn't about the person per se, or it may have been they weren't as quick to adapt to the new way of working than before. So it's just a way to think about what are the factors that influence or impact each of our own individual performance in conjunction with the performance of the person, him or herself.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Kay, let's build on this conversation. And can you talk a little bit about how cultural differences or individual styles factor into how you may tailor your feedback?
So, yeah, I was listening to Matt, and talking, Matt, when you shared about ways in which sort of what's going on around can impact feedback. Also, I think cultural and gender differences, they matter a lot in feedback conversations too. Matt, you asked me a question when we were in the green room, and you said, why, I'm a technology person, right? I've been at Oracle 18 years, have done engineering my whole life. So feedback wasn't a class, right? We took in college. And even in my manager training, and Oracle is fantastic about really equipping their managers to succeed. When I first became a manager, I didn't think that feedback was important because in my mind, you either are a good coder or you're not, right? I brought sort of the attitude that I was taught in electrical engineering. But here's the thing that I've learned now as a people leader, that, for instance, and I've got a very balanced team in this technology organization. Technology tends to be have more males than women. Women get feedback, and it's related or tied to their personality. You were too aggressive, while men's feedback focuses more on results. And I went to a women's conference, and when they said that, I was like, "Ah." And then I thought about it, and I started actually paying attention. I said, "Wow." Um, if even if we sort of take the manager feedback off the table, in my interactions, right, in those private Slack conversations, those private Zoom chats with other males, the comments about the women would in fact be about personality. So one of the things that I wanted to do in my team was focus on actions, not on traits. So if you say, and I like examples, I'm a big example person, so um, it is what it is. But if you say you need to tone it down, not as effective as saying, "Hey, why don't we work to create space for others to share their ideas?" Back to the right, specific and measurable and constructive. And then culturally, in a job before Oracle, one of the things that I had to actually help coach my manager on was, for instance, I don't know if you all noticed, I'm a Black woman. I know, shocking. But as a Black employee, I'm going to just naturally, culturally, have a heightened awareness for stereotypes like being labeled angry or defensive. And so when you're looking at giving the feedback, taking the recipient's culture, and Matt, you said something about empathy, right? Um, if you make feedback feel safe, and start off right with that feedback sandwich by acknowledging strengths, your leadership on this project has been absolutely outstanding. You've got a keen ability to bring people together, and it really stands out. Here's a way we could maybe take that further, right? In that feedback sandwich, all of a sudden you've built trust with that person, because now they're thinking, this person isn't attacking me. They want me to grow. Um, they want me to thrive. And then, right, communication styles is another. Matt, you said that. I'm a naturally bubbly, outgoing. I'm a lot, right? Retired hip hop instructor. I love the stage. And so I don't mind direct feedback. Well, not everyone on my team is like me. Some, right, they prefer a softer approach. And so I always like to say that feedback shouldn't be based on your experiences. Matt, I loved it. I loved how you said flip the mirror, right? And even ask, how do you prefer to receive feedback? A well-placed question could go a long way.
Well said. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Kay. I'm just looking at some of the comments that we're getting in chat.
Ooh, we get on comments. Yeah, let's chat.
Yes. David Binder asks, what advice does the panel have for staying concise and direct when providing feedback? Either of you?
Matt, you want to answer that one?
I try to play this not just in giving feedback, but because once I get excited, I'll start talking, and it's hard to rein me in. But this actually, take this from sales, is try to have a, what do you want to say, 20-80 rule or 40-60, is talk less than the person that is receiving the feedback. Just and have a concise sentence and ask a question, and practice that. Practice. It's simple, it's tactical, it's not a big strategic aha, but it's just try to embrace questions, which is a fantastic coaching technique. I have found is make us say something that is important for you to say about the performance in giving feedback, and then ask a question starting with, I always find helpful, help me understand, dot, dot, dot. Help me understand what you were thinking. Help me understand what was going on. Um, what was happening during that situation or over the course of the last couple months. I don't really have anything much more.
It's very open ended because I use that with my kids. It's when you said help me understand, I said, he's in my house, Matt. I need privacy. Right. But as soon as I say help me understand, they're like, oh, mom, here we go. Because, right. But that's what you want, right? You want to understand because you can't make assumptions that, things are one way. Um, David, I'll say that what I do, if something has happened and feedback needs to be given, I'll write it out, right? Just to sort of get my ideas out. And I don't know if this is cheating or not, but we said tools, right? I'll go to Anthropic Claude and say, take the emotion out, right? Here's a piece of feedback I want to give to this person. And then I'll say, take the emotion out and see how they say it. Then do what Matt said, which is okay, make a statement and then ask a question. You want when you're giving the feedback to feel that person to feel like this person has my best interest at heart and isn't attacking.
Excellent. Excellent.
That and just is that
Everything
cheating?
Kay just said.
Is that cheating? Is using AI? I'm a tools girl, right? And I love AI.
No,
So
I mean, it's I one of the things I've brought to, and I think it'll maybe come up. I'll save it for later in the conversation, but there's something about practicing and writing down without losing the humanity and the emotions that are part of anyone's performance, because it can strike, like me, to the core, and it's hard to separate me versus my performance. And I think if you're giving the feedback and it's not natural to you and you need to practice, but practice on what you want to say to be concise, and retain and embrace the humanity and the vulnerability that goes with both the giving and receiving of feedback.
Oh my gosh, 100% agreement, 100%. And Mark is weighing in, Mark Brumley. It's not cheating, Kay. It's not cheating at all.
Not at
So
all.
I think that let's
She's never done what you've done, but I'm actually wrote it down like, oh, that's
so
if
let
you put no yapping at the end, and then make sure this doesn't sound like an AI bot wrote it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. For feedback to work, you have to have high levels of trust. And if in any way your delivery is coming off inauthentic or disingenuous or like it was written by AI, it is sure to fail. So I think the net of this message is it's wonderful to use these tremendous tools at your disposal while also ensuring that you come into those conversations, especially if it's a particularly difficult one, especially if you know the person might be ultra sensitive or prone to getting really defensive and shutting down, and write it out. Matt, like you said, I'm a little embarrassed to admit how many decades of leadership experience I have. Despite that, I will still role play sometimes with a trusted colleague before going into a super difficult conversation. And then the last thing I'll add, back to the aspect of the inevitable messiness of human interaction, you're not striving for perfection. You may misstep. You may say something not exactly as you intended. That's okay. It's not about perfection. It's about connection and remembering that the intention is you are genuinely trying to help this individual get better. You're there to help them elevate their performance. I too could go on and on about this. Uh, so Kay, both of you brought up the importance of empathy. And by the way, David Binder, thank you so much for asking that question, because we talked about the fact that clear is kind. Part of being clear, as Kay said, is being very specific and being very concise. If your feedback is overly wordy and meandering, that's not kind. It's not being clear. Okay, so Matt, what are some best practices for maintaining respect and empathy while delivering tough news, especially if maybe the person is getting a little combative or defensive? And do you have a story that you could share?
Yeah. Again, two or three things come to mind. One is very, very tactical. Uh, try to have the surroundings that are setting it up for success. How many times when you're either on the phone or you're at Starbucks or you're receiving something and it's hard to hear and it's busy and there's distractions around, those small little details sometimes can take something sideways or make it. So to the extent you can, um, ma- try to find private time where it's just you and the person, whether it's virtual or otherwise. Both of you have mentioned this, and I think the undercurrent to a lot of this is establishing and building and maintaining trust. I have found when people are giving me feedback, have given me feedback as well as I give feedback, is to use personal examples. And I think the appropriate dosage of vulnerability and using personal examples goes a long way to establishing trust because it takes a little bit of. I try to think about, is the person going to be a sponge or is it going to be Teflon? Like, are we gonna absorb and take in and retain that information so I go make for a better day, a better tomorrow? Or is it gonna be Teflon and I'm just, ooh, I can't take that. So because everyone can be better at something every day, whenever the situation arises for feedback, is using personal examples, I think I've seen go a long way, both as in giving and receiving. And then you mentioned something in your opening remarks, Carrie. I think the third thing would be being kind means doing it now versus kicking a much worse can down the road. This is, and we have to check ourselves to make sure that our intent for giving feedback is to support versus punish, and not punish in like, make someone feel, you know, uh, very, very poor about themselves. But if even if we're in a corrective situation where someone might be on a performance improvement plan, approaching it with a pure mindset and intention of trying to get to a better spot where the performance is meeting expectations, if not exceeding, it has to be there, because that is ultimately it's giving them that feedback is for their benefit, uh, in the short term and the long term.
Oh, uh, such great points. And you mentioned it's pretty simple and tactical. I would say it's extra important, especially given the fact that so many of us work remotely now out of our homes, where it's much more common where we may, during some meetings, have a child on our lap or, the inevitable distractions. So making sure that it's an appropriate time and place for the person to really concentrate and take it in, I think is so very important. Uh, we have a question that you actually touched on. The question is, are there any specific frameworks or formulas you'd recommend for providing effective feedback? Matt, I know you mentioned the SBI, the situation, not B, performance.
Situation, behavior, impact.
Okay.
SB.
Yeah, I'm thank you for asking this question so we could repeat that clearly.
Yeah.
Situation before behavior impact. Kay, I know you talked a little bit about the sandwich approach. Can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, so a feedback sandwich, as the giver of the feedback, I'm always thoughtful about how I enter the conversation and then how I leave. And for just a brief period in my career, I sort of stopped doing the engineering thing and I moved into the enablement organization. And there was we were receiving a training on how best to enable sales engineers, right? On Oracle technology. And we had an outside speaker come in and they said that people remember the beginning, right? The end, the middle, they sort of, right? So if you take that and you apply that to the feedback sandwich, starting off with, here's some things that you're doing very well in the organization that sort of prepares them, right? And the meat is in the middle, right? The meat is where you're giving that very specific, that very actionable, non-vague feedback. And then ending the conversation with, here's how you're doing something, something well. And I had to sort of come up with that. In a past role, we Matt and I were talking earlier in the green room about managing and getting employees that are sort of having trauma reactions, and that trauma could be created because they had a difficult manager, a really bad situation that happened, and so then they start working for you because maybe they're like, you know what, I'm leaving this job and I'm starting somewhere else. Well, when you get that, right, the resistance, the Teflon, um, if you will, those walls immediately go up. And that feedback sandwich is a way to sort of slowly chip at that, and build trust with that person. And I'm not saying that because I've done that well. I'll tell a story later, but uh, uh, I didn't do that well, and so I kind of came up with that formula.
Great. Thank you. We've got some great add-ons to that. David Binder is saying, I think the approach can work if the positive feedback is authentic and not manufactured in a way to soften the feedback for improvement. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I also would say that's a great example of where you're going to adjust your formula or your approach depending on the culture, depending on the situation. Like you talked about, Kay, someone that experienced a lot of trauma. If you work with someone who's really values straight talk, they want you to get straight to the point, then you
Don't
might
meander.
by that. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, we've talked a lot about strategies for effectively giving feedback. Let's talk about being in a place to effectively receive feedback. What strategies have you found most helpful in remaining personally open to feedback, especially in some cases where you don't think it's fair or it's somewhat difficult to hear? Okay.
Okay. So I am a recovering perfectionist. So of course, feedback, right, that doesn't say, "Oh my God, Kay, you're amazing." Like, well, why? Right? And so, I've had to, as a leader, really be okay with having that feedback. And the culture in my organization, especially with my Instagram, right? I'll have different members of my team say, "Hey, your last Instagram was about false urgency. Is this really false urgency? Is this project that you're saying we have to do? Is this false urgent?" So I get them sort of using my words, not in my favor. I You said two words, Matt, authentic, but the big one here is vulnerability. I look at the feedback as, this is going to be helpful in helping me to grow. And because now I know, okay, you have to separate the feedback from the behavior. Even if I get feedback that where the person didn't attend this session and isn't really good at it, I'll still look at it and say, okay, what nugget, what thing can I learn from that? Right. This is all part of my recovering perfectionist. Right. These are my things that I say to myself in the mirror. Is there a kernel of truth to this? And they're not saying I'm a bad person. They're saying that there's something in my performance that could improve. And so if if we're having trouble sort of finding that, I'll do what I normally do, ask questions. Can you provide me an example so that I fully understand and I don't make assumptions?
Excellent. Great. Matt, what would you add?
I just became aware that I need to become a recovering perfectionist too. Like,
Do we need to have meetings, Matt? I think so. I
I
can
just,
invite you to them.
so yes, gosh, that and the feedback sandwich. This is fantastic. I I mean everything Kay just said. I don't. I guess what I would say is, and this is a really, when I mentioned earlier, stumbling into feedback. on the receiving end is accept it as a gift, and try to bring that gift mindset that, as Kay said, like whether you grew up in the arts or athletics or sciences, um, when it's not about us and we recognize, hey, I need to improve. For me, it was my tennis serve or my forehand. Um, I can accept that I need to improve something about my performance. And so whether it's about how I'm showing up and something that is about uh, me as a professional, or simply something that is a tweak to a process that I'm doing, try to accept it as a gift. Uh, and so that would be number one. Number two is, and I think it's dovetails to what Kay is mentioning, is I think of it as non-attachment. So there's detached, which is we're not plugged in and we've kind of checked out. I'm oversimplifying it. And then there's attached, and we can be too attached to something, or I'm too attached to something about myself, or the job that I have, or the aspirations that I'm after. And non-attachment is the space which is being open to saying, oh, I know that I'm good at X, Y, and Z, and someone's telling me that for me to get better at this or that or everything, here's an opportunity to be objective, more objectively minded about that. So this realm of non-attachment is something I actually came through to, in yoga. It just helps keep that space of I'm still involved, I'm engaged, and I'm not so attached to being resistant to the performance that needs to improve.
Oh, I love that concept. That's excellent. And I'm so appreciative that you framed it that way versus don't take it personally.
Right.
That's hard to
Would
do.
you ever not take anything from this?
It is personal. We're talking about, see,
I'm a person.
that's kind of a pet.
I thought about it that way, Kay. That's brilliant. Yes.
No, I just thank you. That's such a wonderful way to frame it. And a few other things that I'd add. Kay, you mentioned it, you can apply all of the best practices we've talked about in terms of how to effectively give feedback with greatest respect and empathy and clarity to how you receive it. So, if, for instance, you're not getting specifics and they're just general statements, as you said, Kay, it's totally appropriate to say, I really appreciate you sharing this with me. Can you provide me with some specific examples? In addition, if you're not given that space, like you talked about, Matt, to provide the feedback and then give the person the opportunity to, ask questions, help me to understand. If you're not given that opportunity, it's totally appropriate to say, again, I really appreciate you sharing this with me. Can I just share a little bit about what was going on for me during that situation? And maybe you see it a little bit differently, and let's help work through that. So, to have the courage to bring your own input and layer to the conversation is also very, very appropriate. Because the other thing you're trying to achieve is to take it in, figure out how you can get better, and continue to maintain a productive working relationship with the individual. So let's talk about Kay. I think you had a story you wanted to share, and I think it related to giving advice for navigating emotional and defensive reactions to critical feedback.
Oh yes, my story. So, I had so this um employee came from a very toxic work environment, and the feedback, it was tough feedback that I had to give. Um, and what I noticed, and I had a meeting with a person's previous manager. And one of the things that he shared was, um, I guess if I'm a recovering perfectionist, she probably needed to join Matt and I's program. So there were often tears with any feedback that wasn't positive. So what ended up happening for her, she was not able to grow in the role. And then now this new job starts to feel toxic, right? Because you have manager after manager who, once someone starts crying, people, oh, and they kind of shut down. Um, so then when she landed with me, I really wanted to help, right? And I wanted to really build those levels of trust. And in our first go did not go well. There was no feedback sandwich. Um, I was so prepared for the crying that, Matt, what did you say? I think I detached, right? So rather than respond to the crying, I kept going. And then that didn't go well either. So it turned there was something in a marriage workshop that I said, when someone responds to a level 2 with a 10, it's more about them than about you. And so once we got to the level 10, something in me said, stop. Okay, this is not productive. We need to do a redo. Um, but I burned a significant bridge and spent a few months really trying to sort of work our way back to a safe space where I could give feedback. Because I mean, if you work for me and we're working on all of these projects, I have to be able to guide you and coach you without fear of a tough response. So then I employed the feedback sandwich. And every time I gave feedback to her from then on, it was, you're doing fantastic. The way that you're able to execute with not enough resources and with these tight timelines is really a marvel. And then we got into the meat, and then I ended it. She started expecting it. So even from then on, after the feedback, she would not respond, waiting for the good feedback. Right. And I mean, it was about a year, but it taught me how to be a better people leader of someone who comes in with baggage. And you said it, right? You can't, we have to take things personal. We're human. Humans have baggage. So it improved me. But, occasionally I'll kind of go into a shame storm, right? To use a Brene Brown term about how I handled it initially.
Huh.
I
Uh,
love Brene Brown, by the way.
oh, yeah. Well, I do too. Thank you for sharing that, Kay. And it's really helpful because again, we're not gonna get this right sometimes. And I think that was a really, really good example of meeting the individual where she was and building from there. And just in the example where you led with really acknowledging how well she was performing given the limited resources, et cetera, that's kind of getting to that systems point, Matt, that you talked about, that, there's a lot that goes into what influences our performance. So let's broaden this before we come to an end where you share some of your parting advice. Uh, Matt, what can leaders do to foster a healthy feedback culture? Let's take this beyond just the individual and how do we really foster this throughout a work environment, throughout a culture?
Um, listen to Kay. I mean,
Matt, I tell my husband this all the time, but somehow it's not working.
I bet that's a work in progress. Yeah, no, I I think what I have seen and what I've tried to do is leaders can set the tone and model behaviors by first acknowledging this is a hard thing. I mean, feedback is so, it's simple and it's straightforward and it's hard. And I think to the extent you can bring, whether it's a first time supervisor, if you're on the call and you're a first time supervisor, or you're an experienced, 20, 30 years of leadership, it's still hard. And because we're dealing with people who are messy, is acknowledge that. Bring some humanity, bring some vulnerability, and share your own journey to the extent that you can, or that you feel comfortable in building that trust. Modeling and setting the tone for the team by asking questions, by instilling feedback, I think is really, really key. And um, as we've discussed in this, it like performance review sometimes can be a one-time thing over the course of the year. Like, how did I do over the year? Well, I don't, things change. Try to make it continuous, uh, and commit to contracting or commit to revisiting. So if something hasn't gone well and it needs to improve, get to a point, whether it's through the SBI tool, which it culminates in when there's corrective feedback given with, hey, let's come up with a plan. I'd like you to draft what you think needs to happen differently and come up with a time frame, whether it's a day, a week, a month, where we can check back in with each other. And along the way, let me know what support, and I'll check in with you to ask what support you need between now and then, but revisit it. It shouldn't be a one-time conversation. That is ultimately damaging to the person, because you how do we know that the performance is improving? So as a leader, commit to the fact that you might not be perfect at it and you're practicing, and it's okay to share that with your team, because by modeling that, setting that tone, and modeling those behaviors sends a message that it's okay, that we're going to work through this, and then commit to revisit it regularly and as much as needed to get to the spot. And if it doesn't, that's, to Gary's opening remarks, all performance is not always going to meet expectations. But I would rather have that conversation of, look, we said that we were going to try X and we only got to Y. Let's either recommit to seeing it through, or that's a different conversation. And I would rather have that conversation than not have the conversation and have to deliver really, really bad news because we didn't do what was right by the person because it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Matt. And I appreciate you bringing that up. And that is kindness, to provide that clarity and that really clear feedback and expectations and support along the way. And if ultimately the individual, it's just not the right fit, it's kind to let that person go in a way that isn't completely out of left field,
Right.
right? That's very, very kind. I would just add one quick thing before we go to parting advice, that I actually adopted from a previous organization. We actually had a service code of conduct that was documented and discussed and practiced regularly. And one of those elements I felt was so essential to ensuring a really healthy feedback environment versus a toxic one is setting the expectation that if you have an issue with an individual, talk directly to that individual versus escalating it to your leader. So feedback isn't just about leader to employee, ideally employee to leader, it's peer to peer. Uh, and if that's difficult for you and you need some coaching and we need to do some role playing, absolutely. But we know how much that can erode trust within an organization. If I had an interaction with my peer K, she pissed me off, I didn't have the courage to give her the feedback directly. I go to my boss, Matt. K did this. Matt goes to K. There goes our relationship. So
You literally you torched it and just added a fresh dose of toxicity in. Yeah.
wonderful.
Well said.
Okay. Okay. So I'd like to close, and we'll start with you, Matt. If you could give one piece of feedback related advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Um, there's probably recency bias at play because I have some home improvement things that are being done, but yeah, there's going to be a gazillion or 1,000 doors that you're going to walk through in your career. Um, Feedback, I think, is a key to help open some of those. So really, really just try to embrace not just the giving of feedback, but start with asking for feedback. Because I think when you ask it, you're going to open yourself up to things that you can pay forward to other people. And I wish I had known that earlier in my career.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Don't just wait to receive it. Seek it out. Okay.
I was going to actually say the same thing, Matt. The As a recovering perfectionist, the advice I give is not to take the feedback personally and to use it as data. Um, my younger self saw feedback as, and literally I would translate, they could be talking and all I would see is this, and what my brain heard was, Kay, you are bad. Right. And as a perfectionist, in immediately, right, I felt attacked. And there, it if I would have sought out um uh sources like this, um, and gone to conferences and etc. I think I would be better for it today. Um, there was another one that I was thinking of. I wanted to share about the toxicity and escalation. Being able to have crucial conversations and getting really good and comfortable with having the hard conversations to my younger self would have saved me a lot of angst. So those two, the one that Matt said, and being comfortable with having hard conversations.
Great. I'll just tag on mine. Don't practice avoidance. It can be so tempting, meaning if you have a really difficult conversation you know you need to have with someone, you know it's going to be tough, it's going to take some emotional toll. I've got a lot on my plate today. I can let this one go. Mistake. So make it a priority, make it timely. Thank you both so much. This has been such a treat, and I have just such enormous respect for both of you. And it was great to get the perspectives from very different career backgrounds and lenses. So, and thank you to our audience. Wonderful feedback that you all shared. We're going to close by giving a preview of the topic that we'll be covering during next week's live. And that is all around meetings. We can't avoid them. So let's make sure the ones we have are needed and they're highly productive. And our pro Stephanie is going to provide all kinds of this advice on that front. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you for having me.